And welcome back to the first day of the week of Who Would Win. Today's first Who Would Win comes to us from TickerFan901. And they asked the question, who would win a fight, Homer Simpson or Peter Griffin? And, I mean, really, this is the fight we got. We got this fight. Now, when we got the crossover, and that was a great crossover. But, technically speaking, Peter won the fight, but there was mitigating circumstances. There was a lot of things, and it was just, Homer didn't die or anything. He came back. So if the fight had continued, and maybe there was also, plot set up for that. So, but if the fight continued in a space where these guys are just beating the crap out of each other, who would ultimately win? And, I mean, that's actually very interesting, because unlike most other cartoons, maybe not very interesting, but it's at least unique to talk about, because unlike most other cartoon characters you see, there really isn't much Toon Force abilities with these guys. With the Peter, there's an exception when it comes to his cutaways. Like, he's cut off his hand, his fingers, he wants to cut off his junk, and he's fine next episode. He smoked himself into oblivion, tried to cut away, didn't work, but he's fine the next episode. So if we're going to go by the idea of Toon Force and what that implies, Peter does not seem immune to the things that he is, that he flicks upon himself in a short period of time. But within, let's call it 24 hours, or at least within a certain amount of time, that stuff is negated. Even his death, which has happened multiple times, in theory, the Peter we're looking at isn't even a real Peter. One episode we get revealed as this evil android doppelganger. But yes, he does seem to have minor Toon Force due to cutaways. Homer doesn't have for all intent and purposes, the world of the Simpsons is just a pretty real world with some minor things here and there. The Treehouse of Horrors is always the thing that happens every year. But yeah, mostly it's more realistic in terms of how it functions than the Family Guy world, which does seem to exist in a more super reality where you can get talking animals that can react with humans. You can get a baby who can just talk and is a super genius, all that. So the levels of reality are certainly a little bit more skewed with Family Guy than they are in Simpsons. There's very little in Simpsons that doesn't come off as like, okay, that's maybe a little ridiculous, but for all intent and purposes, could happen. There's some exceptions, but for all intent and purposes, that's the way it kind of functions between universes. So Peter kind of comes into an advantage because he will ultimately negate whatever happens to him. He can't just get punched and ignore it like the Mask can. We've seen him get his ass kicked and then come back and get his ass kicked. And come back from the fight, his ass thoroughly kicked. It takes time for him to recover. By all accounts, he is still a normal guy. It's just that if you want to go Toon Force logic, he will eventually recover from anything because that's just the way the show works. But if we're talking about the straight parameters of the fight, well, no, Peter's just going to function like a regular guy. In fact, Peter gets his ass kicked most of the time. Gets his ass kicked by Joe, by Quagmire, by Quagmire, I think at least once. By Liam Neeson, by the giant chicken. He's gotten his ass kicked quite a bit. Now, he can actually hold his own, though, by his younger son at one point, too. But he can hold his own in a fight surprisingly well for a guy his size. Homer, we don't see that as much with him. Homer, while he does have his moments of lashing out, isn't really a fighter, per se. He's just a drunk. Both of them are... really enough, we know Homer was like diabetic or pre-diabetic, at least. Peter, we know, is mentally retarded, but surprisingly, he isn't diabetic. He's he's a bit borderline alcoholic, maybe even crossing the border at points, but he's not a diabetic, which is interesting. He's just very overweight. Bad eyesight in his part, too. So I guess if Homer hits him in the glasses and Peter can't see, there's that. But surprisingly, yes, Peter, for most of the entire run of Family Guy, except for his weight and the occasional disease he catches once in a while, he's actually a pretty healthy guy. Whereas in Homer, we know actually do know he suffers or suffered from either pre-diabetes or diabetes. He does in fact have it. Not that it really matters, but it does kind of show you where they kind of lie health-wise. I will say this too: we've seen Peter engage in physical combat a lot more often when we've seen Homer engage in it, and he actually can handle himself a bit better. So honestly, had that fight actually continued into a legitimate, like, winning scenario, like who wins in a straight-out fist fight, my money's actually going to go on Peter still. He's just proven that he's been able to handle himself more often than not in a fight than Homer is. Not to say that Homer hasn't been in fights before. It's just Simpsons doesn't do that very often. And Family Guy does that more often, which gives Peter more outs to prove that he can handle that. So for my money, I am surprisingly, shockingly, going to go with Peter in this fight. I actually thought I might have rooted for Homer, but no, it turns out I think Peter would be the winner. But it's just my opinion. What do you think in the comments below? Let me know. Until then, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Like, comment, share, subscribe, as I itch my nose. You want us to review something, put in the comments below. Let us know. We'll do a review of it at some point. Hit that bell if you want to be notified. I'll catch you folks later. Have a good one.